I caught my boyfriend cheating on me with my best friend, on her wedding day, no less. And to top it all off, every single one of our friends had known about it. So, instead of confronting them in private, I decided to expose them in the most humiliating way possible, right in the middle of my wedding speech. That moment shattered everything, and Elaine's fiancé walked out, leaving her stranded at the altar. Back in college, I was part of a small, but close-knit group of friends from my department. Over the years, we all stayed in touch. There were 7 of us in total, 4 guys and 3 girls. One of them, let's call her Elaine, was more than just a friend. She was my college roommate and practically my sister. We were inseparable. She had been my closest friend since our university days, and I never imagined that she would be the one to betray me in the worst way possible. I had also been in a long-term relationship with one of the guys from our group for 8 years. Let's call him Nick. Originally, he had been the one closest to this circle of friends, but when we started dating, I naturally became part of it too, and Elaine did as well. Nick and I had been together since our second year of college when I was 20. We had gone through a lot together, had our fair share of rough patches, but we always managed to work things out. At least, that's what I thought. For the past year, though, I had been trying to talk to him about marriage, and every time, he shut me down, insisting that he wasn't ready. I couldn't understand it. We were both settled in our careers, financially stable, and had even been living together for the past 4 years. There was nothing holding us back, at least from my perspective. I wanted to build a life with him, start a family, and I didn't see why marriage was such a big deal when we had already spent nearly a decade together. But Nick kept pushing back, claiming that I was rushing things, which made absolutely no sense. How is 8 years rushing? He even started saying that I should focus more on my career, which was absurd because I was already incredibly successful. I made more money than anyone else I knew and had been managing my father's office supplies company for 2 years. Plenty of women balance work, marriage, and kids effortlessly. I was more than capable of doing the same, so I knew deep down that his excuses weren't about work or timing. The truth was, he just didn't want to commit, and that realization stung. We had been arguing about this for months, but despite everything, I never once suspected that he was being unfaithful. He didn't act distant or secretive. Even after our fights, we always seemed to find our way back to each other. I genuinely believed that no matter what, we would figure things out. But then Elaine's wedding happened, and I was blindsided. It wasn't just that Nick was cheating, it was who he was cheating with. My best friend. The bride. And it wasn't some one-time mistake either. God knows how long this had been going on behind my back. I only found out a couple of days before the wedding. I had gone outside to grab my migraine medication, which I had forgotten to pack, and that's when I saw them, Nick and Elaine, hooking up in my car of all places. Out of every possible spot they could have picked, they chose mine. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever, but was probably less than a minute. The second I processed what was happening, I turned on my heel and walked away. My mind was spinning, and I had no idea how to react to what I had just seen. They never even noticed me. They were too wrapped up in each other to realize they had been caught. By the time I made it back inside, the rehearsal dinner was over. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, so I headed to one of my friends' rooms, hoping they could help me figure out what to do. But as I reached the door, I stopped. I could hear voices from inside. Our entire group was in there talking. And then I realized something that made me feel even sicker than I already did. They weren't just talking about Nick and Elaine. They were laughing about it. They all knew. Every single one of them had been aware of what was going on, and not one of them had told me. Instead, they were sitting there, making jokes at my expense, treating my humiliation like some inside joke. The only other girl in our group, Kate, Even joked about how it was only a matter of time before Nick and Elaine got caught because of how reckless they were getting, even sneaking around during the wedding preparations. Apparently, they had even hooked up during Elaine's engagement party after I had gone home early. And the worst part? No one cared. Not one of them was even slightly concerned about how I would feel. To them, it was just something amusing to talk about over drinks. I stood outside that door, listening, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. I had trusted these people. I had considered them my friends. I felt like I was going to throw up. Without saying a word, I turned and walked away. Thankfully, they were too drunk to notice me standing there. At that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to confront them in some quiet, private moment. No. If they thought this was funny, then I was going to make sure everyone knew just how hilarious it really was. That day was, without a doubt, the worst of my life. But after locking myself in my room and crying for about 15 minutes, I pulled myself together. I wasn't about to let anyone see me break. Instead, I started planning my revenge, determined to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. When Nick finally came back to our room that night, I acted as if nothing had happened. I smiled, pretended everything was normal, and went to bed without a word about what I had seen. He had no idea what was coming. The next day, the day of the wedding, I carried on as if nothing was wrong. I greeted everyone like I always would, exchanged pleasantries, and played my part flawlessly. Everything was going as planned until, right before the ceremony was about to begin, I stood up in front of all the guests and announced that I wanted to make a speech in honor of my best friend, the bride. That was unexpected, to say the least. Wedding speeches don't usually happen before the vows, so a few people exchanged confused glances. Elaine, however, must have assumed I was about to give a heartfelt tribute about how much I loved her and how much I would miss her after she got married. So she smiled and gave me the go-ahead. Big mistake. I took the microphone and, in front of everyone, laid out exactly what I had witnessed the night before. I told them about how I had walked in on Nick and Elaine making out in my car. Then, I let them know that it wasn't just a one-time thing. I exposed everything I had overheard the night before in our friend's room. I talked about how my so-called friends had been laughing behind my back, about how Nick and Elaine had been sneaking around for God knows how long, even hooking up during her engagement party while I was none the wiser. At that point, at least the rest of our friend group had the decency to look ashamed. But honestly, I couldn't care less about them. They were irrelevant. The only reactions I cared about were Nick's and Elaine's. As the truth sank in, they both lost it. Nick, who was standing next to me, immediately tried to shut me up. He grabbed my arm and whispered frantically, telling me to sit down, to stop talking, as if that was going to fix anything. Elaine, on the other hand, completely flipped out. She started yelling, accusing me of being jealous of her, claiming that I was only doing this because I was bitter that my boyfriend wouldn't propose to me. According to her, I was just trying to steal her thunder and ruin her big day. But her performance was a little too over the top, and her fiancé, who had been standing there, stunned, throughout my entire speech, wasn't buying it. The moment he realized I wasn't lying, he turned and walked away. Elaine panicked. She ran after him, calling his name, but it was too late. He was done. And with that, the entire wedding descended into chaos. People were whispering, gasping, exchanging looks of shock. Some guests left, others stayed to gawk at the disaster unfolding before them. But I wasn't interested in the aftermath. I shrugged Nick's hands off me, walked straight to the parking lot, where I had already packed my things in advance, got into my car, and drove home. That was 3 days ago. For the first 2 days, I didn't hear from anyone. No texts, no calls, nothing. Then, yesterday, Nick finally reached out. And what did he have to say? Did he apologize? Did he admit his mistakes? Of course not. Instead, he told me that while he and Elaine had been wrong, what I did was psychotic. Apparently, I hadn't just ruined Elaine's wedding, I had destroyed her life. According to him, her parents had cut her off completely, and her fiancé had officially dumped her. She was now broke and homeless because, as it turns out, she had been banking on that wedding to secure her future. In other words, Elaine was a gold digger. This whole wedding had been nothing but a scheme from the start. She and her fiancé hadn't met through their families earlier this year, as they had told everyone. They actually met on a dating app. Her fiancé, who was 6 years older than her, had been given an ultimatum by his parents: either settle down and get married, or continue partying and lose his inheritance. He had no real interest in marriage. He was just looking for someone who would agree to an open arrangement so he could keep sleeping around while still securing his family's money. Elaine, on the other hand, had been struggling. She had been unemployed for over a year, hopping from one short-lived career attempt to another, unable to stick with anything. She wasn't interested in building a career. She just wanted to marry rich and live an easy life. And when she met her fiancé, she saw her opportunity. They struck a deal. A fake marriage where he got to keep his inheritance, and she got financial security. It was a win-win. But of course, their families had no idea about this little arrangement. And after my speech, his parents were horrified. There was no way they were going to let their son marry a woman like that, especially after the entire wedding had been turned into a public scandal. So the deal was off. The wedding was canceled. And Elaine? She had nothing. For the past few months, she had been living with her fiancé, completely dependent on him, expecting to transition from that into a comfortable married life. Now, with nowhere to go and no money of her own, she was completely screwed. And you know what? I don't feel bad about it. Not even a little. Since Elaine had already quit her last sales job, the fallout from the wedding left her completely stranded. Even her parents refused to take her back, which meant she had nowhere to go. And given her lack of qualifications, finding a new job wasn't going to be easy. Even if she did land something, it wouldn't pay much. Now Nick is acting like I'm the villain in this situation. According to him, I ruined Elaine's life by being insensitive instead of handling things privately. He thinks I should have just confronted them behind closed doors instead of exposing them in front of everyone and making things worse for her. Apparently, even our friends, who had happily laughed about the affair behind my back, want nothing to do with them now. Elaine's in serious trouble, and somehow, Nick expects me to feel guilty about it. Honestly, I don't think her life is ruined. She just has to get a job, stick with it, and actually do something for herself instead of relying on other people. If anything, I probably did her a favor. But, if I'm being completely honest, the one thing that does make me feel a little uneasy is how my speech might have affected her family. I know that what I said at the wedding didn't just reflect badly on her. It probably humiliated both families in front of all those guests. And the truth is, I've met Elaine's parents. They're genuinely kind people. That's the only part of what Nick said that stuck with me. Looking back, maybe I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have confronted Nick and Elaine in private, broken up with him, and walked away without causing such a public spectacle. Maybe I could have avoided turning everything into this level of drama. But at the same time, I don't regret exposing them. They had it coming. So yeah, if I have any regrets, it's not about what I did to Elaine. It's about the fact that I dragged her family into it. Maybe I should have spared them. But as for Elaine and Nick, they deserved every bit of it. Edit. I honestly have no idea how long their affair had been going on. The only information I have is what I overheard that night outside my friend's room. They were mostly just cracking jokes and saying stupid things. But the one concrete detail that stood out was what they said about the engagement party. That night, I had gone home early because of a migraine, something that happens to me a lot if I spend too much time in loud environments. I've seen plenty of doctors about it. I take medication for it, but the bottom line is, I need a lot of rest when it flares up. So, it wasn't unusual for me to leave events early. And since our friends were always around, I never thought it was fair to ask Nick to leave with me. He always stayed behind and came home later. Up until recently, I had never thought to question it. I had never had a reason to be suspicious. Now, though, I can't help but wonder if this had been going on for a long time, and I was just too blind to see it. But whatever. It's over now. They can keep sneaking around to their heart's content for all I care. That's not my problem anymore. Although, if I had to guess, I don't think Elaine will actually want to stay with Nick long term. For one, he's nowhere near as rich as she wants her men to be. And if they do end up together, he's definitely going to expect her to work, which she's not going to like. Nick always said he didn't want to be the sole provider in a relationship. It was too much pressure for him. His words, not mine. Back then, I actually found that to be an admirable quality. Now, not so much. But Elaine? Elaine definitely won't admire it. And honestly, I don't think Nick will be able to tolerate her either. She's an even bigger drama queen than I ever was, and knowing him, he's going to get sick of that real fast. But hey, that's their problem now. Update. It's been 2 days since I posted this, and I still haven't responded to Nick's ridiculous message about how I ruined Elaine's life. And I'm not going to. I don't owe anyone an apology. I was furious. I reacted in a way that was harsh, yes, but it was also justified. If that made other people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine. Nick tried to make me feel guilty by bringing up how I embarrassed her parents. And yeah, I do feel a little bad about that. But am I sorry enough to reach out and apologize? No, because at the end of the day, they raised her, and she's the one who made those choices. She's the one who betrayed me. She deserved what she got. And I'm not in the mood to apologize to anyone. So for now, I'm staying out of it. I did send Nick a text though, but it wasn't to talk about Elaine. I told him he needs to come by soon and collect his things. Obviously, now that we're done, I don't want any trace of him left in my home. Just the sight of his stuff lying around pisses me off. So, I boxed up everything, set it aside, and the second he picks it up, I'm done. Once that's taken care of, I'm blocking him, just like I already blocked Elaine and the rest of our so-called friends. Now that some time has passed, the weight of everything is finally hitting me. The initial adrenaline rush is gone, and I feel exhausted. Sad. Not because I miss Nick or Elaine, but because I can't believe how deeply I was betrayed. But at least now, I know the truth. And at least now, I can finally move on. I wasn't just betrayed by one person. I was betrayed by my boyfriend, my best friend, and an entire group of people I had considered my family. That's how close we all were, or at least, how close I thought we were. Naturally, the weight of that realization hit me hard, and I've been extremely emotional about it. Thankfully, my real family, my biological family, has been by my side through all of this. They've been checking in on me, stopping by every day to take care of me and, more importantly, making sure I'm taking care of myself. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. At least I know there are still people in my life who genuinely care about me. Update 2. So, today, nearly 9 days after everything went down, Nick finally decided to text me. He said he'd be coming by in the evening to pick up his things. I was fine with that. He hadn't reached out once in the past 9 days, so I assumed he would just take his stuff and leave without any drama. Of course, I was wrong. When he arrived, I handed over the boxes with his things, expecting him to just take them and go. But instead, he told me he wanted to look around the house to make sure I hadn't missed anything. I hesitated. I didn't really want to let him in, and honestly, it felt like a tedious waste of time. But then again, I might have overlooked something, and I wanted this whole thing to be over in one go. So I let him in. He walked through the house, grabbed a few more of his belongings, and I thought that would be the end of it. But instead of leaving, he just stood there, loitering, holding on to his things, not saying anything. It got awkward fast, so I finally asked him if he was planning on leaving anytime soon. That's when he dropped it. He told me he needed to talk to me, that he had hoped I would be more willing to have a real conversation now that some time had passed. The way he said it, you'd think years had gone by instead of just 9 days. That alone irritated me, but what really pissed me off was the fact that he acted like I owed him this conversation, as if there was something that still needed to be worked out between us. So, I shut it down immediately. I told him I had already been very clear when I texted him. He was only welcome in my house to pick up his things. Now that he had done that, there was no reason for him to stay, and I had no interest in talking to him. But instead of leaving, he started arguing with me. According to him, even though he had cheated, I was acting like I was completely innocent, as if this whole situation wasn't entirely his fault. At first, I stayed curt, trying to keep my cool. I was already irritated, but I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. But then, he had to say it. That one sentence that made me completely snap. "You're not perfect either." I lost it. I started yelling, screaming at him, because I could not believe the audacity. He was actually trying to imply that I had somehow driven him to cheat. Even before he started arguing back, I already knew what was coming next. I had replayed it in my head a million times, thinking about it from every angle. Like I mentioned in my original post, we had been fighting for months about getting married. I wanted to settle down, start a family. He kept putting it off, saying he wasn't ready. I knew he was going to use that as his excuse. And sure enough, that's exactly where he went. He tried to paint himself as the real victim. According to him, he wasn't ready for commitment, and I was pressuring him. He said it would have been a bad decision for him to settle down so soon, that he needed to live his life first. That for 8 years, he had only ever been with me. That everything we did was always with each other in mind. That he felt like he didn't even know who he was anymore. And somehow, that was my fault. He actually thought these were valid points. As if it somehow justified what he did. As if the fact that he wasn't sure of himself after 8 years meant that I should have just accepted it, smiled, and waited around while he slept with my best friend. The way I see it, if he really had such a massive issue with committing to me after 8 years together, then that meant we wanted completely different things. And if that was the case, then there were only 2 mature ways to handle it. Keep talking, work through it, and try to find a compromise. Break up. But instead, he took a third option, cheating. Because he wanted to have the best of both worlds. He wanted to do whatever he wanted while keeping me as his backup plan. And somehow, I was the terrible person for not being okay with that. The way he kept spinning the narrative, acting like we were both equally at fault, infuriated me to the point that I screamed myself hoarse. And even then, he still wouldn't stop arguing. He kept trying to justify himself. Kept saying that he had been under so much stress because of me. That Elaine just got him in a way that I never did. I told him to leave over and over again, but he wouldn't go. He just kept saying that I needed to understand, that I wasn't a perfect person either, that I had been just as toxic as he had. At that point, I realized something. He wasn't here to apologize. He wasn't here to take responsibility. He was here to make himself feel better. He wanted me to say something, anything, that would make it easier for him to sleep at night. He wanted me to say that maybe I had pushed him too hard, that maybe I had been too focused on marriage, that maybe some part of this was my fault. But I wasn't going to give him that. So, I did the only thing left to do. I walked to the front door, opened it, looked him straight in the eyes, and I said, "Get out." Then I stood there, waiting, staring him down until he had no choice but to grab his stuff and leave. And the second that door closed behind him, I blocked his number. I probably should have called the cops on him, but honestly, I was too caught up in the moment for it to even cross my mind. By the time I was completely done with the conversation, I simply walked over to the door, opened it wide, and stood there silently, waiting. Meanwhile, he kept running his mouth, desperately trying to defend himself with excuse after excuse. It was exhausting listening to him twist the situation around, acting like his actions were somehow justified. But I refused to take the bait. I just stood there, arms crossed, staring at the open doorway, silently urging him to get out. It took him several long, agonizing minutes to finally get the hint. Every second that passed tested my patience because all I wanted was for him to leave. But I held my ground, refusing to engage any further. And just as he was about to walk out, he threw in one final dig. "You can pretend all you want, but we both know it takes two people to ruin a relationship." Honestly, he wasn't wrong. It did take two people, him and Elaine. But I wasn't about to waste my breath pointing that out. Engaging with him any further would have just spiraled into another argument, and I was far too drained to entertain that. So I stayed quiet. He walked out. I shut the door behind him. And for the first time in days, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. Still, the entire conversation left me completely rattled. Even when we were together, he had always struggled to admit when he was wrong. Back then, I found it almost endearing, something that I could overlook. But now, it was just infuriating. Honestly, if he had stuck around for even a second longer, I might have thrown something at him. But it's done. He's gone. I blocked his number the second the door closed behind him, and now I'm turning all my energy toward myself. I've been hitting the gym more often. It helps me stay grounded, keeps me from overthinking. I've also started journaling, which has been surprisingly therapeutic. It's going to take time to fully move past everything, but I know it's a process. After all, no matter how much I want to erase the last 8 years, the reality is that they happened, and they left a mark. But I refuse to let that mark define me. Update 3. It's been 2 years since my last update. I've thought about posting here a few times, but today, I finally got around to logging in. So here's what's been happening in my life. Work. It's been amazing. Better than I ever could have imagined. I've really built something for myself, and I'm proud of that. Fitness has also become a huge part of my life. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who actually enjoys working out, but here I am. It makes me feel strong, mentally and physically. As for my old college friends, I haven't spoken to any of them in the past 2 years, and honestly, I don't care to know how they're doing. They're a part of my past, and that's exactly where they belong. The people who truly matter, my family, have been there for me through everything. They supported me, checked in on me, and made sure I never felt alone. And in the end, that's all I really need. I keep my circle small now. Just a few old friends from school and some coworkers I trust. But at least I know they're real friends, the kind of people who genuinely care about me, not the ones who pretend to be on my side while betraying me behind my back. And for the past few weeks, I've been seeing someone. For a long time, I wasn't interested in dating. I needed time to heal, to work through everything and make sure I wasn't carrying old wounds into something new. But then, at a friend's birthday party, I met him. One of my friends introduced me to her cousin, and from the moment we started talking, I felt something. A connection. He's sweet, kind, and different. The way he carries himself, the way he listens, it's nothing like what I had before. My friend set us up on a date, and we've been seeing each other ever since. I was upfront about everything. I told him about my past, how long I had been in my last relationship, and why I wanted to take things slow. And he completely understood. He respects my boundaries, never pressures me, and has even told me that he's willing to wait as long as I need because, in his words, I seem like the perfect girl for him. And the best part? We actually want the same things. Marriage, family, a future together. We're on the same page in a way I never was with Nick. For the first time in years, I feel like I might have found someone right for me. Meanwhile, Nick and Elaine? I recently found out through an old college acquaintance, who's a bit of a gossip, that they actually got married a few months after my last update. And guess what? They didn't even last a year. They got divorced within 12 months. Do I feel bad? Not in the slightest. That would be a blatant lie. But I do hope they learn something from all of this. Maybe they'll think twice before treating someone else the way they treated me. Then again, knowing them? Probably not. But that's not my problem anymore. All I know is that I'm finally fully over it.